Hello everybody, welcome, good afternoon. My name is Tamsin Rose and I am the moderator for you for this conversation this afternoon on staying the course, driving sustainability forward in a shifting geopolitical context. I'm delighted to see so many of you here. In fact, we're having to find extra chairs for the room, and I know that we also have an online audience of possibly 200 people, so welcome all of you to this conversation, which is extremely timely. Just a few days ago, the new College of Commissioners were voted in and will start their work. So they are right at the beginning of their 5-year mandate. And this conversation is about climate change and environmental degradation. And those are not things that are distant threats that are far away. They're happening here and now. They're manifesting in extreme weather events, biodiversity loss, and economic impacts. And we just need to think a few weeks ago about the devastating floods in Valencia, where more than 200 people lost their lives, to understand that there is a human and economic cost for inaction. The European Union has a commitment to be the first climate-neutral continent by 2050. And that's both a goal and also a vision for a way to have a sustainable, resilient future. But this ambition demands that we make a transition that is just and inclusive and we leave no one behind. As Europe attempts to decarbonise, we must also confront our own role in exporting emissions. It's not good enough for us to outsource high emission production to other regions. So the EU should champion not only clean energy within its borders, but also fair and sustainable practices in the global supply chains. The transition to a green economy must be just and equitable because we know that climate change disproportionately affects the people who are already the most vulnerable within Europe and across the globe. It's marginalised communities that face the dual burden of both climate impacts and economic inequality. So fairness and inclusivity must be a red thread through everything we do. The EU should and must set a global example by integrating social justice into its climate strategies. Now, these are all key principles that we need to see translated into action by the incoming new College of Commissioners. It will be interesting to see how the allocation of portfolios and new responsibilities delivers on that. But today, it's a call for collaboration because we will not deliver this vision alone. This is a vision that requires all of us, all of society, and all stakeholders. So, what we're going to do is we're going to briefly assess Europe's current environmental strategies, but also critical milestones for next year. We will see how we could collectively deliver effective policy implementation. And we are very privileged to have here, representing the European Environment Agency, which delivers the essential facts and evidence to guide this climate action that is so urgent. And it's going to highlight both successes and areas that require urgent improvement. So before I pass the floor, just to let you know how this will work, I have a number of speakers who will be providing their perspectives, stakeholder organisations, and at different points I will be opening the floor to you in the room. In the room, it's analogue, it's hands up, and we will bring a microphone to you. And I have colleagues sitting at the back of the table who are monitoring the online audience. So they will be letting me know when we have input from the online audience, and we will share their perspectives as well. So throughout our session, I'll be looking to hear your comments, your questions, and your suggestions. So that's how we'll be having this conversation. I really look forward to a dynamic interaction. But let me now pass the floor to Lena Moninen, the Executive Director of the European Environment Agency. Lena.
We live in an era of anxiety and uncertainty, an era of change. This is how President Ursula von der Leyen described our time in the introduction of her political guidelines in July. The guidelines are also very firm. We must and will stay the course on all our goals, including those set in the European Green Deal. So how does one stay the course when the new priorities seem to challenge the direction? How to stay the course when the context has dramatically changed? And how to ensure that we not only stay the course, but also speed up our journey because the time is running out. Last year, 2023, was the warmest year in record globally, and it is quite likely that this year will come in even warmer. Indeed, the devastating flooding we saw in Valencia some weeks ago, with a year's worth of rainfall falling in a matter of hours, is a stark reminder of what we have in store here in Europe. Not to mention the recent hurricanes in North America, typhoons in Asia, or significant droughts happening elsewhere in the world. Beyond the human suffering, which of course has no price, what all these demonstrate is that the cost of inaction far exceeds cost of taking action now. Weather and climate-related extremes caused economic losses estimated at more than 162 billion euros in the EU between 2021 and 2023 alone. And individual cases, such as the flooding in Slovenia 2023, with costs estimated up to 16% of their GDP, show the devastating economic impact that individual events can have at the national level. Of course, floods are immediate, visible, but perhaps even more concerning is the gradual creep of more hidden impacts. Think about water scarcity, soil degradation, socioeconomic instability. These imply future financial and societal costs that can be so high they may be impossible to bear. And here again, not acting now will lead to more costs in the future. Water security is a clear example. People, ecosystems, agriculture, industries all depend on availability of the water. And according to our State of Water report published some weeks ago, about 20% of the European territory and 30% of European citizens are currently affected by water stress every year. And this is expected to get worse in the future because also of the climate change. Another priority is food security. However, 60 to 70% of soils in Europe are degraded, and around 85% of the crops depend at least partially on pollination by insects, which are also in significant decline. So safeguarding and restoring nature are hence crucial for the long-term security of food production here in Europe. So security in the 21st century, all in all, goes beyond purely military or defense considerations. A comprehensive approach to security recognizes also environment, climate and sustainability, playing a critical role in ensuring long-term stability and resilience. Here in the EU, we have achieved a lot over recent years. Especially the European Green Deal and the 8th Environmental Action Programme have been ambitious and even transformative frameworks for catalyzing progress on tackling emissions and protecting environment. The REPower EU has led to a surge of investments in especially renewable energy, and our recently published Trends and Projections report shows that the net greenhouse gas emissions fell by 8% in the EU in 2023. Bringing the total reduction to 37% below 1990 levels. And this is really good progress. But there's still quite a gap to achieve the at least 55% reduction by 2030. And there is also now a clear commitment to achieve climate neutrality by 2050. And of course, the 2040 target, the 90% has been also confirmed now by the Commission. So we must be ready to tackle more difficult areas than energy production. These are things like transport, agriculture, and also our consumption and even dietary habits. Another fact is that the EU now makes up only 6% of the directly produced global greenhouse gas emissions. So let's be frank, much of our impact, future global impact will have to come from global leadership, green diplomacy, and demonstrating the benefits of action. We do have big challenges. The next phase of our journey involves the implementation of existing legislation, which is a lot, as well as a significant acceleration of work on emissions reduction, climate adaptation, and environmental protection. If we are to stay true to the goals of the European Green Deal, if we are to stay the course, then we will all need to redouble our efforts. And these efforts will take place in a very difficult context, one which is described in our recently published Sustainability Transitions Outlook report as polycrisis. So, context where environmental crises converge with economic, social and geopolitical crisis. The future is far from certain. So COP29 in Baku some weeks ago, while making progress, at least some to an extent, on climate financing, will probably not be considered as a watershed moment. And recent electoral outcomes here in Europe and beyond add more uncertainty into the mix. And many factors are at play in the changing political landscape we see. And one undeniable factor is that the significant parts of the population feel that the current status quo simply isn't working for them. They feel that any change is better than no change. So policymakers have to really think carefully how they can support those being at risk of being left behind, about how they direct resources and investments, and about how they demonstrate the benefits also here and now on action on the environment. No reason to despair, and we cannot despair. Competitiveness and security can go hand in hand with environment and climate ambitions. And indeed, it is only by ensuring stable natural resource base that we can enhance the EU's long-term resilience and strengthen its competitive position. This idea is very clearly echoed in the new Commission's political guidelines. And the climate change impacts are already with us. They are going to get worse before they are getting better. Our UCRA report, European Climate Risk Assessment, we published in spring, laid this bare. It examined 36 major climate risks, and 21 of these are identified as needing more action right now, and 8 of them being particularly urgent. And here again, there are opportunities to drive security and competitiveness and to reduce inequalities by investing in societal resilience and supporting disadvantaged groups and communities. Which brings me to the topic that is perhaps the most important consideration, justice. Leaving no one behind. We have heard this phrase many times in the recent years, maybe even overused. But perhaps this is because it is at the very heart of the conundrum we face. The economic impacts of sustainability transitions are felt very differently across different social groups, sectors, regions, and generations. So justice and fairness will only become more important in the discourse moving forward. The mechanisms of investment and the role of the financial system in supporting the transition are going to be absolutely key to progress. This has been highlighted in major reports from Mario Draghi, Enrico Letta, and also Sauli Niinistö. The most recent estimates put the requirements at around 520 billion euros per year of additional investment from 2021 to 2030. But these are investments, not costs. And they are investments in our shared future. And they can deliver economic as well as environmental and social benefits. Some examples: investments in renewable energy and public transport reduce inequality by providing affordable access to vital resources and services. Reducing pollution, improving access to green space, and protecting nature increases food security and reduces health inequalities. And a more circular economy reduces resource use and pollution and also promotes security, competitiveness, and strategic autonomy by keeping the critical raw materials in the European value chain. The good news is that we do have more knowledge and experience on the transitions than ever before. We know about the challenges we face. We know about the many solutions which already exist. And we see many promising avenues we can explore. This knowledge is key. Now, perhaps more than ever, we need to bring robust scientific data to support environmental policy development. And our agency, European Environment Agency, working with our network of experts and partners in the member states and beyond, continues to collect, analyze, and publish scientific data and knowledge. And we continue working to support policy making and implementation across the EU. And we continue also keeping the European citizens informed. We are also looking opportunities to harness new technologies in our work, things like smart monitoring, tech or artificial intelligence, to modernize, simplify reporting and catalyze better implementation. In September next year, we are going to publish our 5-yearly flagship report on the state and outlook of Europe's environment. The report will bring together our knowledge and analysis gathered over the last 5 years. It will present a comprehensive and integrated overview of where Europe is on its sustainability journey, and it will examine where we need to be focusing our efforts in the future. To conclude, in this era of anxiety and uncertainty, in this challenging context, staying the course on the green transition is the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do to protect our environment for future generations. It's the right thing to do to prevent the worst effects of climate breakdown and the suffering that comes with it. And we know it is more urgent than ever. But now we must also be ready to examine in more depth and demonstrate how green transition can contribute to the EU's competitiveness, strategic autonomy and security, while also helping to build a fairer and healthier society. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Lena. Please join the panel. I'm also going to introduce to you the other speakers who will be helping to explore this issue further. So welcome Benjamin van Bunderen-Robrechts, who is an activist and the founder of the Climate Justice for Rosa campaign. Please come and join me. Joining me online, I have Dirk Messner, the director for the German Environment Agency. Let me invite MEP Paul Holmgren to please come and join me, a member of the European Parliament for the Committee on Environment, Public Health and Food Safety. I have Dennis Kredler, who is the Senior Director of Government Affairs Europe for Dow, which interestingly is a private sector company that actually has a global net zero target in place by 2050. So we'll hear a little bit more from him about how he does that. And also Veronika Hunt-Safrankova, the head of the Brussels office for UNEP, the United Nations Environment Programme. So this is my panel who will help us to explore some of the issues that Lena set out, some of the challenges that were in that. Let me start with you, Benjamin. I'd like you to tell us about Rosa. Your campaign is Climate Justice for Rosa. Tell us about Rosa.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for inviting me. Kind of feel out of my league, but very happy to be here. So Rosa is the greatest person I ever met. I met her in 2021 at a summer camp, really a camp for young people that wanted to change the world. It was in the Ardennes in Belgium. And we would spend all day talking about climate, talking about all the things that were wrong in the world, basically, and how we were going to solve it, how we were going to do better than our parents. And I mean, it wasn't all serious, of course. Rosa would also crawl out of the window of her room to go dance in the fields around our campsite. We talked, I played my bass, she sang, and we made plans for the rest of the summer. But then on the 14th of July, 2021, it started to rain. And there was a small stream that flowed through our campsite that a couple of, I think like 200 meters later, flowed into one of the biggest rivers of the Ardennes. And it was at the end of the afternoon. We were in the house where we always were, but we could see the water rising and rising second by second. We had to get out. The building was going to flood. So me, Rosa, and some others went outside. We were at the field. We had to cross to get higher up to cross a bridge. But then suddenly Rosa got grabbed by the water. She was in the water, she was screaming, but the water was too strong. I immediately started running till I couldn't anymore because there was a bush, and I jumped into the water right next to her. I was holding her with one arm while trying to grab some branches that were hanging over the stream, but the water was too strong. And then I don't exactly know what happened, but we went underwater. Then I got hit by a pole that was sticking out of the water, grabbed it with one arm, but the water was so strong that Rosa got pulled out of my hands. I crawled out of the stream, but I couldn't see her anymore. And 3 days later, 7 kilometers further down the big river, her body was found. So yeah, those floods were caused by the climate crisis. In the same floods, 38 other people died in Belgium, 180 people died in Germany. And yeah, the months and weeks after the accident, I didn't know what to do. Like, how can it be that a climate activist like Rosa died in floods caused by the climate crisis? I had to do something. I always was at the climate marches before that. Rosa too, we just hadn't met there. So I had to do something. So then I decided to start a campaign, Climate Justice for Rosa, to really show everyone that the climate crisis isn't just about numbers and statistics. And I mean, that's really important, but it's about people. It's about the people behind the numbers. We just create way more awareness about the human tragedies behind the climate crisis. That's why I came with the idea of ensuring the 15th of July, one of the days of the floods, as the European Day for the victims of the global climate crisis. To really have a day each year where we can remember the people that we've lost, but also honor their lives by taking action, by making sure not countless more people like Rosa have to die. And I'm very happy and proud to say that on the European level, it has been recognized more than a year ago, and on Belgium level a couple of months ago. And now I'm trying to get that day also to a UN level, because the climate crisis is a global problem. Most people die in the global south, so we should have that day everywhere, and we should continue creating awareness, because a lot of times when I talk to people, especially politicians, they tell me like, yeah, Ben, I know we should take more action, but yeah, there's not enough awareness, I'm afraid to do these things. Then also in myself, I think, yeah, a good politician should create its own awareness. But if they don't, yeah, we will do it for them. I mean, it's so important to really make people feel what the climate crisis is.
Thank you, Benjamin, and for sharing your story and reminding us that it's people at the heart of this. So you're now a strong climate activist and an ambassador, and you've just come back from COP29. Having been there and seen what happened, and most importantly, what didn't happen there, what is your message to EU policymakers?
Yeah, Baku was really, I mean, I wasn't planning on going, but then the floods in Spain happened and I decided I had to go. So I did go, and it was not really a good experience. Nothing basically, I mean something, but not enough. Nothing groundbreaking happened. So I really urge all EU policymakers to take action. Don't let countries like Saudi Arabia decide that we shouldn't do more. I mean, COP is the minimum. We could do so much more. We can protect so much more people. So really increase funding for loss and damages. I think that's the first. The countries that have contributed the least to the climate crisis are suffering the most, and that's just not right. Also, climate finance would be, more money should go to that. And last thing, very important, is hold polluters accountable. You can't get away with this. You can't get away with knowing that what you're doing, your actions, are hurting people, because they are hurting people, they're killing people. People like that should be held accountable. That's also why with 7 other people that have witnessed the climate crisis, I sued Total Energies in Paris in May, because what they're doing is wrong, and it's one of the first climate cases in criminal court, because it's so important that the people that take the decisions are held accountable.
Thank you. Dirk, let me bring you in now online. COP29 was really a collapse in the global consensus on climate change, just at a time when we have to accelerate efforts, as we heard from Lena. Germany is the biggest EU member state. You're our strongest economy. So what leadership could it offer to maintain that momentum towards delivering the net zero targets?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. And first, I have to say, Ben, incredible story which you told. I was last week in the Ahr Valley, where we had an extreme weather event in 2021, 200 dead people within one night, a destruction with a volume of 40 billion euros during one night. These are the costs which we have to pay if we don't act. And I would like to support what Ben has been saying. So this to Ben. Then Tasmin, to your question, right? The first point which I wanted to make is that Germany is defining itself as a front runner in climate protection, as an ambitious actor. We try to get climate neutrality right by 2045, so a bit earlier than the European Union as a whole, to signal that we need acceleration. And the whole story, Lina, this is a summary of what you said, is around strong focus on the European Green Deal, not weakening it. strong focus on ecosystems, healthy ecosystems as the basis of our welfare, justice, and then global cooperation. If we don't get these four elements right, we don't get the whole story right. So the second issue which I wanted to highlight is that in our modeling, we can show now that we do not only have in Germany ambitious targets, but we are now able to really achieve our goals. In our modeling and in our scenario building, we can show since 2003 only, because before we had a huge gap between our ambitions and our goals. Now we can show that we can achieve our goals by 2030 because we have been making huge progress during the last 2-3 years in the field of renewable energies, for example. It is accelerating by factor 3 to 4. So there is acceleration. Element number 3, this is a challenge, Tamsin, because you asked about our role in this whole game. The challenge is that 90% of our citizens are convinced that we need the transformation towards the European Green Deal, climate neutrality, and so forth. And 40% at the same time are sure and fear that they will lose economically and socially. So if you don't get this right, Lina, you also mentioned this is about legitimacy and about democracy. So this is the third element. And the fourth element, and I'm seeing a colleague from the private sector, and you are coming from the chemical sector, we have huge debates in Germany how to decarbonize the energy-intensive sectors. This is absolutely key because Germany is a highly industrialized country. Now we have much more industries than most European countries. And this is about new infrastructures, hydrogen. This is about global cooperation, CBAM. This is about the geopolitics of global cooperation. This is CBAM. And this is about green industrial policy. So I would say that this is the playing field which Germany is currently moving in forward.
Thank you. Okay, so you've said that things have accelerated in the last couple of years. So what are the key windows that exist in the next 12 to 24 months? What absolutely should we not miss doing in order to accelerate that momentum that you said had already started to really speed up?
Yeah, I would have in mind, Tamsin, 3 main windows of opportunity and challenges. And the first one is next COP, 30th COP. Ben, you have been visiting the 29th one, which was disappointing. In 2025, we will gather again in Brussels, and the next generation of NDCs will be presented, and they will decide upon the future of global warming, which we do have in front of us. So we have to create global ambition around the NDCs. This is element number 1. This has to do with global cooperation, building alliances, being as ambitious as possible, learning from each other, etc. The second element is that we are preparing, Lina, we discussed this several times, we are preparing for ETS2. So the emission trading scheme now also covering the mobility sector and the building sector, sectors where we are struggling. And people will feel this change. And if we don't get the social dimension of ETS2 right, we will fail in this regard. So being ambitious in creating the ETS2 is very important, and looking and protecting and supporting the vulnerable groups which will be affected by ETS2 on the one hand side, and thinking about how to organize a socially balanced climate dividend. This is element number 2. This is my time window number 2. And time window number 3, and opportunity and challenge at the same time, is that I hope that the new commission, Lina, you talked about it, that the new commission will really strengthen and develop further the European Green Deal, because it is challenged from different perspectives. And therefore, this is so critical, and therefore this discussion is also so important. This is not an automatism. We have to work for it hard.
Excellent. Thank you very much for being so concrete to the things that we should be looking at. So it's the 30th COP, it's the ETS2, and making sure that the new commission, is full speed ahead on the Green Deal. Thank you for that. Now let me turn to the European Parliament, and Pierre, I'm going to invite you to reflect a little bit here, because the Green Deal was very much the foundation set by the outgoing mandate. We've got a huge number of new MEPs in the European Parliament. We've got a new college taking place, and we know already that competitiveness and growth are real priorities for this mandate. Now, the EEA has said there is an overlap, and we should push ahead in the areas where there is synergy, that these are not necessarily contradictory. What's your view? What would this look like?
Well, first of all, I do agree with Lena that there is an overlap, of course, but I also think that we really need to scrutinize when politicians, whether they are from the Commission or colleagues to me in the Parliament, are discussing growth in itself, because we need to start to differentiate between what I usually call economical growth from uneconomical growth, because a lot of the things that we're doing at the moment may be seen as some sort of financial growth in the short run, but in the long run we know that it is exactly those actions that are creating the big problems we see in Europe and the rest of the world. So of course we need to be much better in having this more holistic approach when it comes to connecting economy, energy and environment. Sometimes you call it the triple E equation. But at the same time, when we're talking sustainable development, we also need to understand that the basics for sustainable development is ecological sustainability. And within that frame, we can hopefully create a social sustainability. And within that frame, we can find those items where we can see the overlap. And I mean, as you've already pointed out, we're already seeing all these problems all around Europe. I was in Catalonia this weekend, in and around Barcelona. I had planned to visit Valencia as well, but for different reasons I couldn't get there. I also caught a severe cold, so I'm still a bit behind that cold. I'm much better today than yesterday, and much better than 2 days ago. But we're seeing already the consequences of global warming here in Europe and even more in the rest of the world. And we need then to scrutinize the financial system itself. But at the same time, I do believe that there is an overlap.
Thank you. And just in a moment, I'm going to be opening the floor to the audience here and online. So if you've got a question or comment, be ready. I'll come to you next. But Pierre, another question. We know that there's a very new parliament, a very new political flavour in this parliament. And now it's critical that we take action in Europe, because Europe is the continent that's heating up the fastest in the world. So not only is climate change here, it's likely to accelerate its impact. Do you feel, looking around your colleagues in the parliament, that there is the will for the kinds of radical actions that we need?
Well, to be honest, unfortunately, I do not see that. There are too many, with very populistic views, trying to give oversimplified answers to these very, very complex questions. During the last mandate, we could create a more progressive majority, especially in the environmental committee and sometimes in the parliament as well. There will be problems during this mandate period. And concerning the fact that Europe is the continent where the global warming is the fastest at the moment, is of course, from one perspective, a problem. We are seeing the consequences very clearly now, not the least when it comes to changes in the hydrological cycle with both droughts and floodings. But at the same time, it's actually not a problem from a global perspective, because one of the reasons that we see this very fast warming here in Europe is the fact that we have, throughout the last 30, 40 years, decreased the emissions of particles, aerosols. We have, after all, a bit cleaner air here in Europe compared to 40, 50 years ago. This is what you usually address as the global dimming problem. And that problem is not at all taken care of yet in especially East and Southeast Asia. So although the warming is faster here in Europe, many other parts of the world will see an acceleration of the warming once they take care of the pollutions, as a lot of these pollutions comes from fossil energy and the transport sector. And I would also like to address the fact that yes, we are on the paper, in theory, ambitious. We're talking about climate neutrality by 2050 here in Europe. But at the same time, we must realize that that means, in reality, that all the way up until 2050, we will continue to increase the greenhouse effect, which means that the radiative forcing on the planet will increase, which means that the global warming will accelerate until roughly 2050. So we will probably see a planet that is more than 2 degrees warmer than pre-industrial times before 2050. So we really should raise the ambitions. But to answer your first questions, the way that we see the European Parliament at the moment, I don't think it's possible to raise the ambitions throughout these 5 years. But I do hope that we will be able to make sure that the things that we decided throughout the previous 5 years actually will come into place.
Thank you. Now I'm going to open the floor to questions. Our other panelists will speak after this first interaction. Does anyone have a question that you'd like to put forward based on what you've heard? And I'm also keeping an eye on my online audience. I've got colleagues watching that to see if we have anything. Very sobering news there. We're currently at 1.3 degrees and we've got people dying and billions of dollars of damage. We just heard that we're going to hit 2 or more degrees of warming by 2050, no matter what we do. What we're trying to do is stop things getting worse than that more radically. So, very tough love messages coming through. We also heard from our panelists that 90% of Europeans agree we need to do something in climate change. 40% thinks that that same change they want to see happen will make them worse off. And we've seen the impact of concerns about the cost of living on recent elections. So people feel very uncertain and don't feel that they're going to be supported enough. And that's why I think the elements that our speakers so far have all said is that the social elements are critically important. Does anyone have an intervention you'd like to make? Yes, we'll bring a microphone. If you could just stand up so the microphone can come to you. Thank you. Just briefly tell us who you are.
My name is Paolo Bertoldi. I work for the European Commission. My question to you is the fact that we are doing well in Europe, and you highlighted this, we need to do more, but we are only 8% of global greenhouse gases emissions. So very much our destiny is not in our hands, is in the bigger emitters, China, India, Gulf countries, and the BRICS, etc. So what can we do more to get this country on board and follow our path, basically, of going down to net zero at 2050?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And the person next to you also wanted to say something. I'll collect a couple of the inputs in. Well, I've got more hands. Everyone's woken up. That's great. Yeah. Please, go ahead.
I'll just stand up. It's easier maybe than when you see me. I'm Luc Bas. I'm with the Climate and Environment Risk Assessment Center in Belgium. My question is a bit building on what the colleague here just said, is how dare we leave our risk in the hands of those countries that were just mentioned? If they will not mitigate, climate change will hit hard. Everything points at climate change hitting hard. My question to the panel is, what do we need to do to convince the decision makers to invest more in the protection, in the climate defense? Because it's happening and it's going to get worse, and we are not preparing. This is regardless of the enormous effort we have to do on mitigation. There should be no doubt, but it still seems to be an afterthought, adaptation. And the trick is that, of course, adaptation sometimes also is used for no mitigation. That should not be the case. But the one should not exclude the other. And we're so under-investing in adaptation. Why?
Thank you. So, thought-provoking questions. I had someone over here. There's a lady here who'd like to speak. Thank you. Stand up so the microphone can come to you. It's coming round. And panel, any member is able to respond to these. Yes.
Hi, thank you. I'm Liv Heinrich. I'm coming from the European Commission. I have a question for all of you, I guess. Did your experiences that you describe with populist parties in the parliament or politicians that say that it's not their job to raise awareness, did it change your perspective on democracy and the role of politics in society, or the responsibilities of politicians?
Okay, thank you. We'll take this first round, and then I know I can see you wanted to say something. I'll come to you in a second. Say, panel, how dare we not do something about this? Why are we underinvesting in adaptation and protection? How do we convince others? And I do want to challenge this question that we're only responsible for 8%, because I think we have exported some of our emissions. There's more than that out there. And then finally, and Pierre, I think this is coming to you. Do we change our view of democracy given what's happening? So, Lena, you wanted to go first. Go ahead.
Yes, indeed. I mean, whether it's 8% or actually in my first intervention, I referred to 6% direct greenhouse gas emissions. So indeed, it is a shrinking proportion of the direct impact, but of course we have to remember the historical emissions and the really, I believe, growing indirect emissions that we are indeed exporting via our consumption patterns. I mean, trade with the third countries, etc. So we are not released from the responsibility. But yes, I think this underspending on the societal preparedness to prepare our societies for the climate change impacts, I think this is a very urgent task, because we are talking about really big investments, but also on infrastructure, buildings, roads, all these things that are meant to last for decades. And we are building and constructing all the time without necessarily taking the future, the changed climate and the risks coming with it enough into account. So yes, and I hope that the Commission is really taking this as a serious, which seems to be the case. Climate resilience is a priority for the Commission.
Thank you. Pierre, and I wonder, Veronica, if you can also address this.
Yeah, there was a couple of different questions. I will try to address them all, more or less. Although Lena said quite a lot about the exports of our anthropogenic global warming from Europe. And of course, we need to take full responsibility for that, and not the least when it comes to the historical emissions. Because when we're discussing loss and damage, we didn't need to discuss loss and damage at the COP meetings in the 90s and 10, 15 years ago, but now global warming has gone so far that we need to address loss and damage as well. And when we were doing that analysis, when it comes to emissions, not only present, but historical, it is the European Union and the United States that, especially per capita, is the biggest emitters still. But of course, China is racing towards us and our limits. So. And then brings me to the importance of more or less the same I said in my first statement, that the whole global finance, the view on global finance need to take all of this into account, because otherwise we will start hopefully to do more and more good things, but we will continue to do the bad things as well. And in the long run, it's the combined effects of all the bad things that will create problems. And when it comes to the increased amount of populism in politics, we see it here in Europe, we see it in the United States, we see it all around in many parts of the world. That is, to me, so clearly connected to education, awareness, etc., etc. But it is a problem, once again, that some politicians are making their way by having this very populistic approach and giving these simple answers to these very, very complex questions. I mean, in my home country, Sweden, as far as we start to discuss climate, a few of the political parties, and they're in majority now, they only discuss pros and cons when it comes to nuclear energy, as that would be the only solution to this very, very complex problem. So, yeah, we need to raise the awareness, and I think we all have a responsibility to create that.
Thank you. Veronique, I mean, the UN is the place where lots of these countries sit and have a conversation. You know, what is the state of this debate? I'm sensing a lot of anger and frustration in the room, but also a sense of, well, you know, Europe's done its part. Why isn't everyone else?
Well, thank you for the question. And indeed, we have had now 3 COPs. Well, one is running still on desertification. The biodiversity COP was a few weeks ago, and the climate one was mentioned. And last week also the negotiations on plastic pollution. So we have had in the space of 3 months 4 major global events, negotiations. And yes, I can see and hear, and from this room also frustration, but at the same time we need to recognize that the world is much more complex than let's say a few years ago, and the fact that there is a bigger polarization of countries, it also means that countries are proactively taking part in the negotiations. They have diverse views, so it's much more difficult to reach consensus, but the discussion is taking place, and it is indeed needed to take place. I can sympathize with some frustrations that the negotiations are long, but there are a lot of parties involved. The process cannot be done in a quick way. But there are parts of the world that are also very much doing green transition. I cannot illustrate it on numbers now, but it's not EU alone. However, EU with the Green Deal very much led politically and theme-wise also, whether it was the biodiversity strategy informing the global biodiversity framework, or the pollutions package, also the zero pollution action. So all these positive inputs from the EU made a big difference on the international level. But I would like to zoom out a little bit also, and to remind ourselves that, mention that the world is a different place than it was a few years ago. We really have to work with this. We heard the socio-economic reality that is happening in the EU, but also in the rest of the world. And at the same time, we need to think beyond the existing challenges. I think that was what Luc was saying, and we discussed that quite a few times, that we are concentrating on what's happening now. But we have to get ready for the fact that, well, we heard from Lena that the natural disasters are increasing, multiplying and intensifying in Europe, but elsewhere. But there are other pieces that are moving. We had the UNEP released global foresight report on the health of the planet and well-being, and it shows the 8 critical shifts that are happening, whether it's the human relationship with environment or displacement, misinformation, lack of trust. So these 8 shifts are changing also the speed of challenges that we have. And the 3 planetary crises are very much feeding into humanitarian crisis about security. Lena mentioned that also. Security, food security, existential issues, which is causing migration also. And maybe if I may also react on the question on the political spectrum in the European Parliament. Yes, it's a different setup than it was during the last mandate. But again, it is a reflection of the socio-economic realities in the different countries, and reflection of what voters wanted to have, what representation was. But what we hear across from all the political spectrum is some concrete examples, and I think that's what we have to communicate in a better way. Why things happen, why is it connected to why investing in environment is good for economy and investment, and why do we have examples from Europe, why do we have also positive examples from Africa, for example, Latin America and the Caribbean. So it's a homework also for all of us to do a better explaining why things are interconnected.
Thank you. I wanted to give this lady here in the front a chance to speak. If you just stand up so the microphone comes to you.
Thank you. Maria Osbeck from UNICEF. I would like to thank Benjamin for your powerful story. And I think this shows that children and youth, also in Europe, are not protected from the impact of climate change. And I would like to share a reflection for your input and feedback, because we note, and I really welcome all the reflections about the need to also acknowledge justice, to acknowledge the need for the social services. But when we at UNICEF look at how climate finance is distributed, we see that only 2.4% of climate finance is invested in services that children rely on. So how can we, as part of this reinventing the ambition, the increased ambition, put greater focus on the social services that children and youth rely on? And how can we see the benefits of that? Because we are talking a lot about the impact, but we also know the cost of inaction and the benefit of investing in health education for a successful green transition, but also in terms of strengthening our adaptation efforts. So it would be interesting to hear your reflections on that. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And do I have Anouk here? Yes. Anouk, I know we wanted to come to you. Anouk from the Dutch Green Health Alliance.
Yes, thank you. So I'm a medical doctor. I'm here with the Dutch Green Health Alliance, which is a Dutch alliance of different healthcare workers and health organizations who advocate for sustainable healthcare practices, but also to bring this health argument in the political sphere when it comes to climate change. As healthcare professionals, we experience climate change as a deeply personal and intimate issue. And also want to thank Benjamin for your story and showing us all that climate change affects everyone. It's not only about melting polar caps or diminishing forests, however urgent and serious, but about the patient who is in front of us. It's about the little kid who lives next to a polluted street and thus suffers from asthma attacks as a consequences. It's about our elderly or homeless patients who are especially at risk during a heat wave. And it's about access to essential healthcare services during extreme weather events such as flooding. Our health affects each and every one of us, and we just believe that health is also a very powerful argument and unifying argument, bridging different perspectives across the political spectrum. At the same time, we see the potential of bottom-up initiatives. For example, when it's mainly healthcare workers themselves who organize towards more sustainable healthcare practices, and then the hospitals and boards following. So my first question was, how do we make sure that those affected and those who drive change are included in discussions and policy places like this?
Thank you. I think those are two very complementary inputs, because we heard, children are often most affected and will have to live the longest in their lives with the impact of climate change, but so little of the effort and the resources is going into that, and their voices are not heard. And then we just heard from Anouk about, the role of healthcare practitioners who see on a daily basis what this means for elderly patients with heart conditions. We know that it has an impact across a number of different things. How do those voices come in? So here it's a panel, it's a question about, social justice. Benjamin, and yes, Dirk, you want to come in. Let's start with Benjamin.
Thanks. I think what you say is really right. We should really make people see that there's such a strong link between climate change and children's rights. For me, that's very clear, but I think most people just haven't realized it. So we should talk about that. I'm also climate advisor with CRIN, Child's Rights International Network, and with them I also work a lot to really create that narrative to really make people see that there's a link. Then also I immediately had to think about two friends of mine, Beauty and Ronzina from Bangladesh, met them at COP, and they told me about that, they had to change schools 3 times because their schools literally fell into the river by the eroding riverbanks in Bangladesh. So the consequences of the climate crisis go so far, especially with children's rights. They're the most vulnerable to the climate crisis, and they're the ones that have to live the longest on this world too, and they have contributed nothing to the climate crisis. So we should do more about that, especially climate finance. I feel like there should really be some kind of commission that really prioritizes children. And also what you said about health, I think when you look at, there's been studies in the Aar Valley, so where you talked about online, it's the same floods as in Belgium, just the other side of the border. And so many people there suffer from things like PTSD, people that have just witnessed what happened, and also especially people that were affected, of course, but just if you witness it, I think 20% of the people suffer from PTSD. That's so much. I myself also suffer from PTSD. And yeah, we should see the climate crisis as a health crisis, as a children's rights crisis. It reaches so far. We can't even imagine what devastating consequences climate catastrophes have after they have happened. So we should create more awareness about that, I think.
Thank you. Dirk, let me bring you in.
Yeah, I wanted to pick up the social dimension of the climate issue, which has been debated, and a very simple observation. The observation is the following. We have a lot of material in literature in terms of conferences and written pieces about the impacts of climate change on different groups in our societies, vulnerability and this, et cetera, et cetera. So there is good material. On the other hand side, there's much less consciousness regarding the impact of climate protection policies and their different impacts on different parts of our communities. I talked about ETS, ETS2. ETS2 is an inflation which we are producing artificially to protect the climate, which is important and correct, which has different impacts on different parts of our social communities. And having this in mind is so important. No? And when we ask for modernization of our buildings from a climate neutrality perspective, this has very different implications for different parts of our society. And this second strand of work, the social dimensions of climate protection policies themselves, this is something which has been neglected so far, and we need to become much better in this regard.
Thank you, Dirk. Let me bring in our last two members of the panel before I open up again to that conversation. Dennis, let me bring you in from a private sector perspective. We heard right at the beginning from Lena just how much money is going to be needed for major investments. This is something your company is involved in. Industry wants regulatory clarity and consistency in order to make these kinds of big investment decisions. How could the EU facilitate your investments in tackling climate change?
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's a pleasure to be here, actually. So you already mentioned that Dow has a global net zero 2050 target in place. And we have underpinned that with an investment program, actually. So we have a program that we call Path to Zero, that documents exactly how we're going to eventually get to net zero in 2050, and that will necessitate investments and a lot of them. Now, I think it's important to understand how companies take investment decisions, because companies invest by giving capital to projects that we have internally, and at any given point in time, we have a slate of different projects that are actually competing for capital allocation. Right? And the capital will go to the project that is the most competitive. In other words, that is the most attractive from an economic business case perspective. And so we took an investment decision last year to build the world's first net zero chemical production complex. And the decision was to build this in Canada. Because that was at the time the most competitive business proposition that we had, and we are building this literally as we speak. We also have a project on our major European site, which is in the Netherlands. We have other sites as well, but this is the largest site we have outside of the United States. And we have not taken an investment decision there, even though this project has really been on the table already for a number of years, but we were unable to take investment decision because we have seen that with the increasing number of Green Deal legislation that we have been getting, that actually our decarbonization business case has been made more expensive by this regulation. And so the reality that we have seen is that the hydrogen regulation, the industrial emissions regulation, other types of regulations that have been put in place to, in fact, accelerate the transformation have actually, in our case, slowed it down. I call this the tragedy of the Green Deal because it's completely counterintuitive, but it's our reality that we have seen. So what we are looking for now is that we actually have a careful look at this regulation that has been passed and actually look very clearly and with a clear mind at what are the cost drivers in this that are actually unnecessary cost drivers, and let's take those out. I'm not talking about getting rid of the regulation, don't get me wrong. We need this regulation in place, and by the way, we need other regulation also, like demand drivers for low carbon products and these sorts of things. So the work is not done on this, but there are cost drivers there that are currently making it impossible to find a viable business case for decarbonization of energy-intensive industries in Europe. We're not the only company and not the only sector that is saying this. And so the first point to answer your question, how can our investments be made possible, is take out those cost drivers from the recently passed Green Deal regulation. And the second point is, related to that, we do need some subsidies for this, but of course the greater the cost that is caused by the regulation, the more subsidies are needed. And so that's not good public policy, of course. So what we are saying is reduce the costs that are unnecessary in the regulation, reduce therefore the need for subsidies, but there is going to have to be subsidies that are going to have to be available for this. The socioeconomic reality was already referenced earlier. That is a fact that has really emerged as an additional unfavorable condition in the last couple of years. So it's very important that we actually get back to a more competitive business environment as well, because nobody will invest in Europe if it's not clear that your business is going to be competitive in the future.
Thank you. And just briefly, we've been talking about the fact that we live in this sort of wildly unpredictable geopolitical context. Do you see, what is the opportunity for Europe to act as a lead towards global efforts towards net zero? Now, you're a company that operates globally, so what's the role you see for Europe here?
So I think Europe plays an important role, but I think it's important that we recognize that Europe is currently not leading the industrial transformation, certainly in the energy-intensive sectors. We have seen other parts of the world, North America, not only the US, have been quite aggressive in terms of the subsidy support that they have given without regulatory constraints to companies. And it's important to recognize that we are not a closed economy in Europe. I think it's important to recall that, because we tend to make policy as if we were a closed economy, but we are an open economy that is embedded in the global trading environment. And so the incentives that are set by what other policy actors are doing around the world play into investment considerations of companies that want to invest in Europe. And it affects your relative competitive position when it comes to investment attractiveness. And we need to factor that in much more, and we're not doing that sufficiently right now.
Thank you. Veronica, let me bring you in now, because we know that across the entire European region, we need to take concerted action to tackle environmental harm. But the geopolitical climate, even within Europe, is extremely fragmented, not least with a conflict right on our borders with Ukraine. Looking at the continent as a whole, are there any bright spots where you can say there's really effective cross-border cooperation happening there? Let's have more of that. I want you to give us a little optimism here.
Yes, I will. No, but my point earlier about the 8 shifts is the point that the world, whether we want it or not, is very much interconnected. So what's happening here has impacts what's happening over there, and vice versa. So talking about European transboundary projects or initiatives, there are, of course, lots of them. I think all of you could name some. I would say the obvious ones is in water management, pollution initiatives, whether it's air pollution, air pollution, or transboundary waste. And the water I mentioned, and the water actually is a strong backbone of the new priorities as well, the water resilience, and there I would highlight the freshwater management and water scarcity. This is indeed a part of the discussions that are happening in Riyadh now as part of the desertification COP. But going closer to here, that this is maybe to complement to what Lena was saying about the water systems. We had also a report very recently that shows that half of the world's countries have degraded freshwater system, and 400 plus river basins globally are seeing flows decline, which is very much also in Europe. So it's not. I know it's not positive, but now going to the more positive angle is forest management. One of the recent initiatives that UNEP initiated last year actually is Mediterranean Forest Initiative that is looking beyond the forest fires and the emergency action, and hopefully now this will respond also to look. This is to look for solutions to prevent the forest fires and look at different forestry measures with nature-based solutions in the Mediterranean. So that's one of the very recent that is very much forming, and we are also discussing at the moment with the European Union how we can amplify this. I would also mention, that it was a UNESCO colleague that mentioned the skills and education. There's a lot happening also under the Global Pact for Youth, Green Skills for Youth. But from the environmental point of view, I would really highlight the pollution, different pollution initiatives. And let me bring it a little bit again on the global level, because the global multilateral environmental agreements have very specific deliverables, both on the global level, regional level, but also national level. And I think this is very often misunderstood, because these global initiatives really have impact in the specific countries. Take, for example, ozone layer that connects us all, but also mercury. That's one of the most recent one in effect in 2017 that really brought phase out of mercury. So there are very positive examples, and we need to encourage this thought that it really makes sense. Whatever is done, whatever COP, then it does have consequences to our everyday lives.
Great, thank you. And just finally, how important is it for the region that the EU keeps up its momentum? You've highlighted there's been progress on water pollution, there's been progress on air quality, we're doing some positive work emerging on forest management. Should we sit back and enjoy that? Or how is it important that we just keep going within the European region?
It's very important for the EU and for the world. We have been praising the European Green Deal, that it really meant a lot to the world. So it improved a lot of the environmental policies here, but it had very positive impact globally. Let me just, if you don't mind sparing just 1 second, I just wanted to quote, which I'm sure that a lot of you will recognize it. It is a new growth strategy that aims to transform the EU into a fair and prosperous society with modern, resource-efficient and competitive economy where there are no net emissions of greenhouse gases in 2050 and where economic growth is decoupled from resource use. So this is a quote from the Commission communication in 2019 when the Green Deal kicked off. So I would like to remind that this is actually what we are reading now. So the Green Deal is very much needed. The implementation is very much needed, but let us also remind ourselves that the Green Deal brought very large transformative change. That doesn't happen from one night to another. This takes time. So we are complaining that the Green Deal didn't deliver or delivered, but it had negative impact. I can see the different sides of the coin. But we cannot expect that the change will come immediately with results. There needs to be patience, so we need to first invest also on the implementation. I very much also like, Lena, what you mentioned at the beginning, that we need to also look at the sectors, how the sectors will respond. And that would be my question, how, for example, in the new vision for agriculture will be the water resilience looked at, for example, how agriculture will deal with water scarcity and vice versa, how agriculture will be in the water resilience. So these discussions need to take place hand in hand with the agriculture, with transport, you mentioned, energy, etc., so that also the industry is heard, but also the nature is heard as well, because that's what we should not forget about nature, and what also we should not forget about the growth and competitiveness. We see there the demand for resources and critical raw materials, but that will have also environmental impact. And we already suffer from a lack of natural resources, and resource, I mean also the water. For example, soil, Lena mentioned the number, it was 60 to 70% land degraded in the EU. Worldwide, it's 40%, so it's a huge number. But that's a great resource. Land is a resource that we need, but then we have the critical raw materials. So we really have to look at all the different options very carefully, how things impact what. Mm-hmm. So that would be my message. Let's be also aware of the resource discussion, and that we tripled resource extraction in the last 50 years. So we should not derive from the circular economy concept and sustainable consumption and production. And last thing, I'm sorry for taking a little bit more time, but that's a very long-lasting argument. Most of you are familiar with the Beyond GDP. It's not a new concept. We have had it for years, for decades, actually. But with the discussion on competitiveness, economic growth, let's also look at the not growth as such, but the well-being. And I think well-being should be at the core of the decision-making, not necessarily growth as such. It's the well-being.
Excellent, thank you. I'm going to open the floor now for contributions. I've got a couple of hands up, but I also am seeing that we've had some input online. Let's just hear what we've got from, what are the comments, what's the mood with our online audience?
So we have a question from Carlos Fulgencio joining us from Portugal. He asks, the EU keeps leading the transition, still it also keeps subsidizing fossil fuel expansion. How do you explain this contradiction to the main public? And then we also have a question from Paul Kettler, joining us from Denmark. And he asked, when we look at the emissions related to imports of emission-intensive goods, does the EU have the right tools to reduce its citizens' total carbon footprint?
Okay, great. So 2 questions there, members of the panel. You know, how can we, on the one hand, say we want to phase out fossil fuels, and on the other hand, we are still subsidizing the extraction and use of fossil fuels? So we've got this policy coherence that was highlighted by Veronica in her last intervention. We are still not there yet. And then, you know, we're importing things that we essentially allow the rest of the world to manufacture for us, and then we complain that the rest of the world is not reducing their emissions. So there's a certain amount of, both of those questions are inviting us to reflect on that. Who might like to speak on that? Pierre, and I see Dirk as well.
Well, when it comes to the fossil subsidies, it should, of course, be a no-brainer. It should be, a no-brainer. But the problem is that we've already invested so much money in those sectors that needs fossil energy to keep them continue to grow for the next few years and give, continue to grow those sectors. Those sectors are so still in need of the fossil energy. But to me, as a green politician, this is one of the first obvious things that we should change, of course. And I've been negotiating the different resolutions for the different COP negotiations during the previous mandate period, and I always tried to get that into the resolution text, that this should be stopped now. But once again, from the more populistic part of the political spectrum, there is often an idea that we need to continue for a little while to keep growth in those sectors as well. And probably one of the most obvious sectors is the agricultural and parts of the forestry as well. Heavily dependent on fossil energy, heavily dependent on many other things as well to keep status quo, to keep the present system just going. But we need a huge paradigm shift when it comes to agriculture and the view on forestry. And of course, we know that during this mandate period, we will start to negotiate the next cap, which to me will be very, very crucial if we are going to make this green transition for real, or if we will still continue, as I mentioned previously, to do a bit more of the good things, but also continue doing the bad things. And on the top of the list when it comes to bad things, if you ask me, is the fossil subsidies.
Thank you. Dirk, please go ahead.
Yeah, I would support Per as first. Supporting burning fossil fuels on the one hand side and trying to get climate neutrality right is nonsense. This is my first sentence. My second sentence is, this is a huge problem. I mean, in Germany, we talk about 65 billion euros annually. This is not a small thing. Our government collapsed in being confronted with the fiscal crisis a few days ago. No? We show at UBA, at the German Environment Agency, that we could reduce these subsidies from 65 to 30 billion within 4 years easily. This is...
Sorry, we've lost you. Is your microphone being switched off? Apologies, we seem to have lost that. And it was going to be great. I'm sorry, we had a problem with the sound here. And you were just saying that there's 65 billion in subsidies. He also can't hear. Sorry, we'll try and fix that. But I think what he was saying is that he could show that 30 billion could be phased out of over 4 years, and who wouldn't want that? But I'm sure there'll be a lot of vested interests who would challenge that. Not least, by the way, us and our own behaviours. I mean, fast fashion is very heavily dependent on fossil fuel. Our agriculture as well. It's, you know, I'm renovating a house in Brussels and I've just signed off on the electricity plan. You know what I've been doing? Going through every single room and adding plugs. Because everything in my life and my kids' life and my family's life needs electricity. So we have been decarbonising our energy sector quite rapidly, but the demand for energy has gone up. And then we're not even talking about playing around with ChatGPT and the amount of energy that consumes. So there is as much inconsistency in our own individual behaviour as there is in the political decision. So that's something we also need to explore. We're sort of coming towards our last 10 minutes, and I'm going to ask our panel to do a final message, but there were a couple of hands that were up, so I need you to just make a very brief point, because I'll get through as many as I can. So let's start here, these two gentlemen here. Put your hands up so that's it. Briefly.
Yes, hello. My name is Eero Jyrkoskinen. I work for IEP, the Institute for European Environmental Policy. I wanted to consult the panelists regarding your expectations of COP negotiations. I had the opportunity in 2009 to follow briefly the government negotiations in Copenhagen on climate. And I got the impression that the problem with the COP negotiations is that whenever different texts are being prepared, there are these different wordings in brackets. And normally what happens is that the lowest common denominator is the one that is picked up. Okay. So how do you expect that we will eventually meet the challenges if our negotiation process is like this? Do you think it's going to work out? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Hi, my name is Jørn from the Greater Copenhagen EU office, Denmark. I have a very brief question for Mr. Kretler. You mentioned cost-driving aspects of EGD legislation. Maybe you could specify that, maybe give an example or two, because I'm a bit, it's new to me.
That's great. Yes, I'm going to just come here. You've had a chance to speak, so let me give this gentleman, and there was someone there, and you want to speak. So you've all got to be very brief before our panel wraps up.
Yeah, thank you. Kevin Flowers, European Commission, DG Environment. I'm slightly, the question I'd like to put to the panel is whether we are perhaps, or certain interests in the stakeholder community, particularly the business community, are using the European Green Deal as a scapegoat for the competitiveness and productivity issues that we see in Europe. When we look at the Draghi report and some of the work done by the ECB, we see them pointing to much more fundamental things, energy costs, lack of dynamism, venture capital issues, too high savings, all this sort of thing. So I had a little bit the same related question to the one that was asked earlier to Mr. Kredler, which is, was it really just an energy cost issue that has driven you away, or are there really quite big European Green Deal cost drivers that have played into your equation? And I would also be very curious, I mean in a genuine sense, curious to hear what those are. But I have a slight fear that we're kicking over here, whereas the problem's more somewhere else. But it's convenient because some people can reduce costs and make more profits in the short term by hollowing out the European Green Deal.
Thank you. This gentleman here, stand up, and then I was going to come to here, and I'll try.
Thank you, Tamsin. I'm Mr. Baruti. I'm an academic, sometimes in the peace building, sometimes in environmental issue. But my question is to all panelists here on the behavior of developing countries in the COP29. They left the negotiation, and only after one night of negotiation, they say, we found a solution. For me, it's a kind of they want just to keep people in the good condition, but it's not for me, it's not the best way to address the climate change issue. It's better to postpone or to find another round of session to find a good solution that to announce after one night only that they found solution on found. It's like a joke for me. I'm sorry, but I wanted to ask the panelists if they trust all the promises or the solution they found in the COP29. Thank you.
Thank you. Dirk, I want to just check that we've got a connection where you can hear us again.
I can hear you again. I had problems during the last 5-6 minutes also. Sorry.
Okay, apologies that we lost the connection to you. Yes, and I will ask you to just repeat your last point when we do the final comments, but I have one more intervention from the floor that I promised to take. Yes, this gentleman, stand up. Thank you.
Radu Raghea, Civil Society, Romania. I want to ask something about the geopolitical context, because I think that our enemies, the European Union's enemies, particularly Russia, but not only, they are using misinformation, disinformation, and other tools regarding also the environment and all of the Green Deal and everything. I think that our enemies use this in terms of values. They always use lies against environment. They use lies against people that cares about these things, and they promote politicians that use lies. Do you agree with us that it's necessary for the European Union to include environment in a strategic response, maybe the European Commission to put it as a strategic response, and how to do it, to not to be all the time in defensive, but also to go offensive against our enemies? Thank you.
Thank you. So panel, in your concluding remarks, you've got lots of things that we need to deal with. Dennis, people want more details. And we had concern from the audience that criticism of the Green Deal, it's a very convenient way to sort of blame everything. And there are other major challenges, demographics, efficiency, skills gaps, investment gaps, how much of the pushback against the Green Deal, this is any member of the panel, is really about the Green Deal or just many other things? We've heard, is the COP, are these intergovernmental sort of negotiations the best way to go forward? Country voices are not being heard, it's not necessarily serious. That this process of negotiations, it's often the lowest common denominator. I'll probably be throwing that to you, Veronica, as a representative of the UN system, and maybe also Lena and Dirk can respond to that. And just to make sure also this issue of misinformation, Benjamin, I'd like you to bring you in to perhaps pick up on, how do we get clarity of message, and to Pierre. So, panelists, we're going to have your final remarks. Veronica, let me start with you.
I don't know where to start, actually.
Pros and cons of international negotiations. Is there a better way?
Yeah, that's a $1 million question. I think it's still the best system. It needs some reflections, that's for sure. I think that we are all exhausted after the 3 COPs, so I think we need a little bit of distance to digest and see how things could be done in a better way. But still, I can't think of any better system. But what we certainly should do is to connect the different negotiations. And we saw it happening already with the climate and biodiversity and desertification, and climate COP had a strong biodiversity. Then we had biodiversity and health, which actually I want to really highlight. We had now desertification and water. So it is happening. We are making more and more synergies between the different COPs, but on the negotiations as such, that's quite a complex one. So to be continued. I think we need another session on that. If this is the concluding, right? So just allow me a few more points for the future. The Green Deal, and I also look forward to hear from you how it is taken from the industry world, but all of us need to wake up that it's the highest time, it's not the high time, it's the highest time really to deliver on the environmental commitments. And it's not environment because of environment, it's existential. And we see, it was mentioned at the opening remarks, the floods, the droughts, everything happening at the same time, but it will be much more intensive. So we really have to wake up to that and be proactive, kind of, as Luc said, look how we can solve the root causes, not only paying the damages, but think in a conceptual way. And the second word I would use also for the sake of industry is the long-term thinking. I hope you will not contradict me, that I think that industry doesn't mind the environmental regulations, but there needs to be the predictability, the long-term perspective, so that you can get ready for the new reality, whatever it is, and be consistent about this. The next point I wanted to make, environment as a human right, we keep forgetting that. It is our basic right, as was recognized at the General Assembly. Science, colleagues from UNESCO are here. Science is very often missed in the conversations. So the work of EA, for example, you are producing fantastic reports. The data is there. So let's use it for the next mandate to really work with data, find solutions based on the data. That's the basic thing.
Great.
And international cooperation, we need it. We cannot do it in isolation, just EU, just another region. It is, again, existential that we work together and that we have collective responsibility. So that's, I will finish with a collective responsibility.
Thank you. And on that collective responsibility, Dennis, people really want to know, what are the cost drivers? What do you actually mean?
Yeah, so a lot of it is actually related to the way hydrogen is regulated, and that goes across a whole host of Green Deal regulations. It's the Renewable Energy Directive, the third revision. It's the way hydrogen is treated under the emissions trading scheme and the CBAM at the same time. And then you get to interesting findings when you sort of look into your projects that are related to hydrogen burning. When you replace fossil fuel with hydrogen, it turns out you actually emit in certain conditions more NOx. And so you get into conflicts with the industrial emissions regulation. And so you need to take all those together, and they affect your business case and your permitting situation. And both of those are issues in our particular case right now. So it begins to be very technical, and this is the problem in this debate, but those are the key regulatory drivers that are all have all been revised as part of the Green Deal, actually. And so we would look to those mostly to have them revised. Now, to the question up here, the Green Deal as a scapegoat. I didn't say that the Green Deal negatively impacts competitiveness. I said it negatively impacts our decarbonization, which is very different. I think we need to distinguish in this discussion between what is the impact on decarbonization. The Green Deal is definitely slowing down our decarbonization, which is unintended and counterintuitive. That needs to be addressed. But a lot of the Green Deal regulation is not yet in force, actually. It's not been implemented, so it can't affect our competitiveness right now. It's affecting expectations, but not current competitiveness. The competitiveness issues we have at the moment are mostly energy costs and actually imports. And that has an effect actually on the expectations that drive our decarbonization plans as well, because if you compete with increasingly lower cost imports that may or may not be cleaner, because by the way, the rest of the world is decarbonizing faster than we are. So in the future, in the foreseeable future, we will be getting cleaner imports than local production as well, which by the way, the CBAM will not address. You can begin to see that if you're trying to build a business case for decarbonization, this competitiveness impediment is a real downer, if I can put it this way. And so my closing statement then would be, what we really need to do is we need to get the Green Deal to become the competitiveness driver that it was intended to be, that it is not right now, and we need to be very unemotional about this. We need to be objective and just go back and see what is working, what is not working, and take out all those things that are not working because they are driving cost.
Thank you. My remaining panel, I need you to stick to just 1 minute because we're already after 2. But Dirk, can I invite you to just reflect on that and make your final message?
Yeah, very quickly. So my first point would be that I think that parts of the private sector are organizing resistance against the European Green Deal. And this is mainly the fossil part of it, for good reasons. No? So we shouldn't be naive. This is my observation number 1. And my observation number 2 is, and here I would support Dennis, what you has been arguing. I think we have to look very critically at the overall incentive schemes and institutional settings for the following reason. When it comes to bureaucracy, there are 3 narratives, and I agree only on one of those. No? The first narrative is that we do not have a bureaucracy problem. I think this is not correct to say, because we are too slow in many, many fields, right? We want to accelerate, and we are very slow. So there is a bureaucracy problem. The second narrative is then, okay, we have a huge bureaucracy problem. We are too slow. This is too costly. Let's bring the standards down. I don't agree with the second narrative, because we cannot bring the standards down. We have been talking about the necessities to organize wealth creation within the planetary boundaries. So the second narrative, which is strong currently, is nonsense. No? The third one is what we all need to look towards, and we need to find solutions on that. And I think, Lina, we discussed this in our EPA network several times. No? What we need is, and what we are looking at is bringing bureaucratic burden down, so lean governance, accelerating implementation, and being as ambitious as possible. This is the combination which we are all looking at. It's not easy, but we need to think about it hard. No? And I think that digital platforms, digital innovations, AI will play a major role in this regard.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you. Pierre.
I could first address the questions regarding COP, and of course it's easy to be critical, as most of the people being there are more or less there to just defend their respective interests. I was in Copenhagen as well as a climate activist. I became a politician just 5-6 years ago, and addressing the fact that I was a bit, to say the least, pessimistic when it came to raising the ambitions in climate regarding mitigation. I can also say that I'm far more optimistic when it came to raising ambitions when it comes to adaptation and resilience during the next 5 years, because I think that most countries in the European Union now, and not regarding which political party you represent, are starting to realize that we actually are having increasing and very huge problems already now. But to end up on a down note anyhow, we're often discussing this thing that we should be within the planetary boundaries, and I would like to remind you all that the planetary boundary for climate is 350 parts per million, and next year we will probably, at least for a few days or maybe a week, reach 430. So we're so far outside of the planetary boundaries already, and still a lot of society, not the least a lot of the political society, are trying to prolong and delay this much needed transition that we should have seen already. Thank you.
Thank you. Benjamin.
Thanks. Yeah, I also wanted to add about COP. I've been to 3 COPs, Egypt, Dubai, and Baku, and also 2 bond sessions. That it's far from perfect. Something should change, but we should, I mean, it's the only thing we have. It's the only place where everyone for 2 weeks, all stakeholders come together and talk about the climate crisis. It's far from perfect, should be improved, but it's the only thing we have. And also I feel like we shouldn't let countries like Saudi Arabia like hold us down. Europe, like even if it's only 6%, not counting the historical things, we should do more. We should at least get that 6% to 0%. We should show the world what can be done. So we should take way more action. And also something I see a lot at COP is through those 3 years that more and more climate activists are really people that have witnessed the climate crisis. They're people that have suffered in their own countries from all over the world. And something I've experienced myself, 3 days after I sued Total Energies, I got violently arrested by the police in Paris for taking part in an action against the Total Energies General Assembly. It was a peaceful protest. I was in the middle of everyone. I was one of the first ones being arrested because I was giving interviews and because I sued Total Energies. I was arrested just for that. Spent 7 hours in an isolation cell because I was a minor, and then was supposed to be let go because the General Assembly finished, but I had to wait another 3 hours for my mom to come from Brussels to Paris. So there should be some kind of framework to protect climate activists, because we want to be allies, we really want to help, we want to, basically we want to protect people, but for that, we get arrested, we get ridiculized by politicians, by leaders. So there should be some kind of framework to protect us, I think.
Thank you. Lina, very last, very brief word.
Great interventions by colleagues, by the way, so thank you. Also, dear, coming to your sobering, clear messages. The European Green Deal has put the environment and climate topics in the middle of the table, and they cannot be taken anymore out, because indeed we are in a desperate last years of trying to tackle and avoid the most disastrous effects. But it is also the reason why now we are being attacked. This agenda is being attacked by machinated disinformation campaigns and by other means. So I think as knowledge organizations, we simply need to continue our work and to bring also information in the palatable format to policymakers, but also the European citizens in more and better, and also connected with the other fields of society which are also represented here, like health and also businesses. So looking forward. Thank you.
Excellent. Can we say a warm thank you to the panel for engaging on these issues? I'm going to draw it to a close. We ran a little over time, but the topic was exciting. It was active. Thank you for those who are watching online. Thank you for those here, and see you again at another Friends of Europe debate sometime soon. Happy holidays.